All right. Okay. So we guys talked about macros before, and I showed you in Excel how macros are converted into a programming code, right? Now, macros are a program. When you write a macro, you are actually writing a computer program that will execute and that will do some work in Excel, okay? So basically a computer program is a set of instructions that you give to the computer to do some tasks, okay? A set of instructions you give to the computer in order for the computer to do some tasks, okay? These instructions, in order to give the computer these instructions, you need to use what we call a programming language. A programming language is a language with some grammar rules and some words and so on. So grammar rules and its own dictionary that we are going to use in order to give the computer something it understands and can execute. Okay, we have zillions of programming languages out there. We have C, C++, Java, Python, or lots of languages out there, and each language has its own strengths and weaknesses. Okay, when you learn about a programming language, the key word here is language. Okay, so like English, like Spanish, like any other language you may learn, in order for you to master the programming language, you need to understand two things: the vocabulary of this language, what vocabulary we use in this language. Okay, this is very important to understand how to speak the language, right? The words themselves, and the grammar, the rules of the language. Okay, so I want you to keep this in mind when we are going through our programming and our work. You need to know the vocabulary and their translation, what they mean, what these words do, and the grammar, how to use these words together. What is the grammar when you are writing a code? Okay. So Visual Basic is one of the programming languages that are very common, and it has been there forever. It has been there for maybe 30, 40 years now. People have been using Visual Basic, right? When Microsoft created Excel and started to think about expanding the functionality of Excel, Microsoft created a simplified version of Visual Basic called Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA. Okay, VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications, is a simplified version of another programming language called Visual Basic. Okay, Visual Basic is one of the simplest programming languages. It's very simple to use. Okay, and therefore it's good to understand the basics of programming. Okay, you can see it from the name of the programming language itself. It has the word basic. Basic means it's really basic. It does basic stuff, right? And then visual means you can create visual interfaces. You can do some programming visually without writing a lot of code. Okay, so we will look at this Visual Basic for Applications, right? So why Visual Basic for Applications? Why did Microsoft create an additional language for Excel? We already have a hard time going through Excel. So why add more complexity to Excel? Right? It's not like Excel is very simple that we need to add more complexity to it, right? So Visual Basic for Application was created to help businesses add more functionality to Excel, right? So Excel has built-in functions like sum, average, max, min, and so on. But what if your business wants to use a new function, a function that does not exist in Excel and it was never created in Excel, right? If you want to create this new function, then there are two things that you can do. The first thing is you can go to Microsoft or some programming companies and ask this company to develop a new software for you. And this is going to take a lot of money and a lot of time, right? In order to develop even the smallest program, at least 3 to 6 months is required. And trust me, you have to pay a lot of money, okay? The other solution is to develop this function in-house inside your business. You can develop your own function and use it immediately. And in this case, this is going to take less time and less money because your own people will be writing the code, right? So Microsoft brought out Visual Basic for applications to provide businesses with the opportunity to develop their own functions, develop their own code that they need for their day-to-day operations, right? Another problem is if you go outside and you want to buy a piece of software, this piece of software is generic. Generic means it's designed to be used by any business, right? But if you want something tailored for your own business, for exactly what you are doing in your business, then developing your own code will help you there. Okay, so Visual Basic for applications was designed to save your time, to save your money, and allow you to tailor functions and tailor solutions to your own business. Okay, but in order to do that, of course, you need to have some programming skills. Okay. Right, so these are some of the benefits to different people in the organization, right? Okay. Right. So what are the components of Visual Basic for applications? Let's have a look. I'm going to open my Visual Basic for applications now, and we will look at this. Okay. So I'm going to open Excel. Okay. This is the doctor's practice that we did last week. I'm going to look at the macros in order to show you the structure of a program in VBA, right? So in order for us to, let me open a new file so you guys can work with me better. Okay, so I'm going to open a new file here, and I'm going to record a macro so you can do the same thing, guys. Okay, so I will go to developer, record macro, and I will call it VBA demo. Okay. I'll press OK, and I will click A1, start entering 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe enter a sum. Okay, then I will stop recording. Okay, Laurel, that's okay. You can turn off your camera, Laurel. That's okay. If this will help you with the Wi-Fi. Okay. Right. So now I have recorded my macro. Stop recording. Now, in order to access this macro, in order to go to Visual Basic and explore Visual Basic, under the Developer tab, at the very far left, you will find an icon or a button called Visual Basic right here, right? So I'm going to click this Visual Basic icon. Okay, and this is going to open a new screen for me. Okay, this screen, right? Now, this screen has 3 parts. You can see it has 3 parts. 2 parts to the left. One is called project, and the other one is called properties. Okay, I will talk about this in a minute. Right? So we have project and we have properties. Okay. Now, let me close this one first. I want to. Okay. Okay. Now, in order to access the code of the macro we just developed, macro code is stored in something called modules. Okay, so a module is a unit of coding. A module is a unit of code, right? A module is where the code of the macros is inserted. So in order for you to access the code we just wrote, we have to go to this folder called modules, click the plus sign, and then under modules, we have module 1. I will double click it, and it's going to open my code, the code I just created in the right-hand side. Okay. Is everyone following, guys? Is anyone behind here?
I don't see the modules folder.
Have you created? Have you created the macro as well as I did?
Yeah.
Then it should be. You can see the whole window, or just the modules.
I don't have the modules folder. That's it.
Okay, so that means you haven't recorded the macro. The macro has not been recorded, because as soon as you record a macro, this module will be created, right? So
Okay.
yeah, so you can go back to Excel and create a macro that does anything. It's not necessarily what I have here. Just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, record the macro, and then stop, and then come back to Visual Basic. Okay. All right. So now under modules, you can have, here we have module 1. You can have module 1, module 2, module 3, and so on. Okay. Right. If we don't have modules, we can create our own modules. So I can right-click modules, and I can create a new module. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is the code for our module. This is the code for our macro. Okay. This is the code for our macro. So again, let's look at the different parts of the screen we see in front of us, and let's try to understand what it looks like and the functionality of everyone. Okay. On your left-hand side here, guys, at the very top, we have the project. You can see the word project here. This is called the Project Explorer. Okay. This is called the Project Explorer. Okay. The Project Explorer is similar to Windows Explorer. It shows you the code pieces and the structure of the Excel file you are working in right now, right? So I'm working in book 2. This is the name of my Excel file. I have only one sheet, sheet 1, right here. And then this workbook is the whole file, okay? And then modules and the programs or the code I have in my file, okay? So this is very important. The project window is very important because I use it to explore my code and do other things that we will go through later on, okay? Right? Below the Project Explorer, this one is something called properties. Properties provides us with some functions or some features of our code that we can change, right? We will work with properties later on when we move to forms and visual parts of VBA, so don't bother yourself with properties now. We want to focus more on the Project Explorer, okay? The properties is important, but we'll talk more about it when we move to creating forms and using visual interface, right? Right? Now, if any of this is not, if you cannot see any of these, so if I delete the project and properties like this, they are gone now. If I want to reopen the Project Explorer or the properties, I go to the View menu right here, View, right? And then you will find I have the Project Explorer right here and Properties window right here. So I will click on Project Explorer and it will open up. And if I click on Properties, it will open up as well. Okay, so from the View menu, we have Project Explorer and Properties windows. Okay, this is the left-hand side. Now, the big part of the screen, the right-hand side, this is where you can write your code. This is where we are going to write our programming code. Okay, so let me show you the structure of a macro. When you write a macro, when you record a macro in Excel, it's converted into a code like this. Okay. Okay. Now, please pay attention in this. Okay. Any code you write, any macro, any code you write in Visual Basic for application starts with the word sub, okay, and ends with end sub, okay. So the last statement, the last thing you write in a macro, if you are coding, is end sub. This is the last thing you will write. Okay, end sub. All the code must go in here. If you write a piece of code outside end sub, you will get an error. Okay, if you write a code, if I write one of these pieces of code outside end sub, I'm going to get an error. Okay, so every single line of code must be between sub and end sub. Okay, the word sub comes from old programming tradition. It means a subroutine. Subroutine is like a function or something like that. Okay, so sub means subroutine or function. Okay, and then after we enter the word sub, we enter the name of our macro. This is the name of our macro here, VBA demo. Okay, and then we open and close parentheses. Okay, so we have sub. This is a vocabulary, guys. Okay, so sub is a vocabulary in programming language. That means that we are starting a new function or starting a new program. Okay, and then the name of this program, and then open and close parentheses, right? So the vocabulary here is the word sub. Okay, and the grammar is how to use the word sub. We write the word sub followed by the name of the macro, and then open close parentheses, and then insert our code. Okay, and at the very end we put in sub at the very end. Okay, so this is the structure of a program. This is how we write program in VBA. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about this macro is, you see that all the words are written in black except this thing at the top in green, right? What's going on here? What's going on? Why is this line green and everything else is black, right? When you write a program code, when you write some program, you can write a program that consists of hundreds of lines of code. Okay, and when you start, if you want to modify your code after a year, after 6 months, and you want to add something to your code, you will find yourself that you forgot what your code is doing, right? So programming languages came up with something very useful to help us understand the code, to help us understand what the code is doing. This is called comments. Okay, comments. A comment is some lines we write inside our code that explains what our code is doing, what is the function of our code. Okay, in Visual Basic for applications, and I will demonstrate that when we start coding, if you want to write a piece of code, then you put a single quotation mark followed by whatever words you want, right? So if, for example, if I want to add another comment, I will put a single quotation mark, and then I will write this program demonstrates VBA. Okay, right? So a single quotation followed by any text. This is called a comment. A comment is free text. You can enter whatever you want when you are doing a comment, right? And this is not part of the code. This is something to explain the code, right? So when you are writing your own code, make sure that you are not, there is no single quotation before your code, right? So if there is a single quotation before anything, then this is a comment. This is not part of the code. If you want to write a code, make sure that there is no single quotation before that. Okay, right? So again, a comment purpose is to help others or help yourself understand what's going on inside your program. Okay, in order to add a comment to your code, we insert a single quotation followed by the explanation we want, whatever we want to put in, right? So for example, I can, inside the code here, when I'm doing the sum, I can insert a comment. I can put single quotation, and I can say the following line computes the sum. Okay, so now it turned green, as you can see, and it tells anyone who reads my code that my following line will compute the sum of the numbers above.